episode 6 of Trev TV. I'm the Trev. Y'all know that. If you're tuning in, if you're watching, that's too sweet. Anyhow, I figured, since I'm going through hockey withdrawals right now, and I'm just kind of not really picking straws, but scrounging my brain on topics that I could talk about in the meantime and in between time. Funny Trev, I know. And an effort for you to get to know the Trev better. I go through my top 10 favorite bands. Now, I say bands, I don't say groups, I don't say artists, I say bands, because I'm not the biggest fan of groups or solo acts. Having said that, here's my top 10. So for number 10, I could have went with the classic oldie but a goodie in the Beatles. I went with the Sex Pistols. Granted, they were only a one album wonder, but at the time when I got into them, it was a very backwards kind of thing going on. I got into grunge first, before I got into punk rock. When I heard about the Sex Pistols, it was a case of, yeah, I might give them a listen to here and there. I mean, didn't think much of it until I picked up Nevermind the Bollocks. And I fell in love with punk rock after that. Fell right in love. So I did it backwards. I got into grunge before I got into punk. Normally, people get into punk and then they get into grunge. Of course, grunge was the thing at the time. But Nevermind the Bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols, was definitely a game changer for me. Would I call it one of the classic albums of all time? Not really. Would I call it one of the best punk records? Absolutely. Hands down, in a heartbeat. One of the best punk rock records ever made. Got into them in 1995. So again, Nevermind the Bollocks came out in 1977. I wasn't even born yet. So that alone tells you the strength of the record. If I was to name my favorite song, well, I'd like to say of the band, but off the record, I can't really narrow it down to one. I have two favorite songs off that record. Holidays in the Sun, which is your album opener, and Pretty Vacant, which is near the end. I can't really say what makes them my favorite songs. They're both speedy, tempoed, they're just great songs. They're usually number 1 and number 2 on my Pistols playlist, because it is a very small playlist. Number 9 is Ghost. They were a band, if you want to call Tobias Forge the band, since he doesn't classify Ghost as a band, he classifies Ghost as a project. They're a band that was introduced to me by a guy I worked with who plays in a folk metal band called Mongol. Check them out. Highly recommended. Keep kicking ass. And when I first heard them, I didn't really think they were all that metal at all. I thought they were a throwback to the 80s, but they were so catchy. And it caught on. It caught on. I mean, despite the massive hard-on for Satan, hail Satan, despite the massive hard-on for Satan, I mean, the songs were catchy, melodically, lyrically, they were all great. I mean, Meliora was the album I got introduced to first, and it's always the go-to album whenever I'm undecided if I want to listen to Opus Eponymous, Infantesium, Meliora, or even the new one, Prequel, however you pronounce it, I call it Prequel. I mean, when you look at it from the storyline-wise, Prequel could be the beginning, because I mean, you take out Papa, and you're left with Cardinal Copia. I mean, that's pretty much starting right back from the beginning, so you might as well call it a prequel, right? But Meliora was the album that was introduced to me, and I got introduced to them in 2015. I think Meliora was already out for a year by then. And it was so hard to say which is my favorite song by Ghost. Off the bat, I was pointing to Year Zero. Year Zero is everything you could hope for in a band that has a massive hard-on for Satan, including the chorus, Hail Satan. If not Year Zero, anything off of Opus Eponymous is a good track. Specifically, Prime Mover is one of my favorites. If not Prime Mover, then the first one. Not the instrumental that starts off the album. Conclavi, Condio would be another good one. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Ghost yet, do so. This is coming from me. Number 8 is Pantera. And I'm glad I got into them when I did. I mean, it was 1995 when I was introduced to them. Far Beyond Driven was already a year released, but the first album I heard from them was Vulgar Display of Power. And oh my good God. Oh, I was still in my grunge punk rock phase, but I knew it wasn't going to last. I wanted something heavier, and that was a good introduction to something heavier. It kicked my ass brutally, and continued to do so. I mean, after that, of course, I went right to Cowboys from Hell, which was okay for a debut album. I was like, no, there's got to be something better than this. And then I got introduced to Far Beyond Driven, and holy fuck. Oh, my ass was black and blue, just like the cover. Just like the tattoo, which is a nice little tribute to Pantera, based off the Far Beyond Driven album cover, more or less the colors. My favorite album from them actually is The Great Southern Trendkill. It's different. It's a little more brutal. It's a lot more raw, and that's the kind of album I like, is a raw album. If I'm going to name a couple of good songs, or my favorite songs from them, right off the bat, I'm taking To Good Friends and a Bottle of Pills, or Suicide Note Part 1 and 2. Now that's two songs in itself, but if you listen to it back to back, like it's supposed to be, like it is off the album, you go from the apathy to the complete psychoticness of Suicide Note Part 2. Oh, take my word on it. You'll enjoy it if you've never heard it. Seen them live once. That was in 2001, and it was right before they got stranded in Europe after the 9/11. And I do have to say, actually, this is probably the worst show I'd ever seen. And it has nothing to do with the setup. It has nothing to do with the sound. It has more to do with the body language. Paul was feeling it. Rex was feeling it. Dime was feeling it. Phil was just there. I think he was just done at that point. You know, I mean, whether it was his back, whether it was he was too concentrated on his side projects, whatever. It really wasn't that good. But I digress. Number 6 is Alice in Chains. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say this right off the bat. I know I'm going to get trolled for this. No Lane, no Alice. I'm sorry. I know people have to move on. Bands have to move on. I can't. Nothing against Robert Duvall. He's an amazing singer. He's an amazing guitarist. For me, it's not Alice in Chains. And I've always had this belief that when one of the main members of the band dies, quit. Fold the band. Do something else. And I thought after Lane died, after they went on hiatus, they would. But again, I digress. But I mean, I'm glad that they're able to actually make a resurgence out of it, even if I'm not on board. I have not heard any new Alice in Chains. I have not listened to Black Gives Way to Blue. I have not listened to The Devil Put Dinosaurs Here, and I doubt that I'm going to listen to their newest album. I can't. It goes against my beliefs. And I'm not saying that belief is word is law or it's carved in stone. I just can't do it. It's the same excuse as to why I can't listen to any Drowning Pool after Bodies. You know, for me, Drowning Pool was Dave, and Bodies was the song, and everything after that was something else. It wasn't Drowning Pool. Sorry. But anyway, I'm not talking about Drowning Pool, I'm talking about Alice in Chains. I got into them in 94, and that was when, you know, I was kind of expanding my whole grunge phase, because, I mean, for me at the time, 94, grunge was life, alternative music was life, and Alice in Chains was just a band that I really, 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 really got into. I mean, I don't know if it was so much the lyrical content as much as it was Lane's voice, and the fact that he triple layered his voice, and he had the yarl. You know, when you sing like this, not so much a twangy yarl, it was more of a... It was a Lane yarl. I can't describe it perfectly, but that made his vocals just, to die for. Favorite album by them is Dirt, obviously. I mean, I think that's everybody's favorite Alice in Chains album. Because, I mean, you can't really classify Jar of Flies as an album, because they even classify it as an EP. But, I mean, if you want to count EPs, Jar of Flies belongs right up there, too. Again, it was hard to pick one song, so I picked two. Sick Man off of Dirt, and that's just more for the drum tempo. And the way the song flows, you come in really nice, and then you go right to the verse, and slow down on the chorus, and you go right back up. Your typical grunge song. If not Sick Man, I Stay Away off Jar of Flies. That was a nice acoustic electric melody that, it gave me shivers the first time I heard about it. I'm actually getting goosebumps talking about it right now. That's how good of a song I thought it is to this day. Number 6 is Foo Fighters. And I got into them in 95. I think everybody got into them in 95 with their self-titled album. And I even went through the phase of, how dare Dave do this? Yada, yada, yada. Why is he the front man of a band that, he shouldn't be? And yada, yada, yada. And I mean, I didn't really resent him for it, but I just didn't understand until later on. Like, when Color and the Shape came out, it's like, okay, this is why he did it. I get it. And as soon as Nothing Left to Lose came out, I was really disappointed with it. So I kind of put them down for a bit. It wasn't until, I want to say In Your Honor, but I think it was more Echoes, Silence, Patience, and Grace that really got me back into them. And I mean, by then, yeah, they weren't so much the grunge band. They were the grunge band. They were more the post-grunge band. But they still kick ass. Seen them live twice. First time was at Edgefest 98. And I got a neat little story to tell. After their set was done, I mean, they only had the 2 albums, self-titled Color and the Shape, so they're only playing off those. They played a couple covers, they played some B-sides. The set was over, and where the stage is right here. This back here is where there was a chain link fence. And they're coming down the stairs off the stage, and I'm about, I want to say 9 or 10 people in. And, Dave's kind of doing the motions, high fives, whatever. He comes my way, and I get completely starstruck. I'm like, this is the dude from Nirvana. He's like, he introduced himself. Hey, I'm Dave. Yeah, you're Dave. And you're awesome. Nice to meet you. Yada, yada, yada. 3 people down. A chick got his gum. That was Edgefest 98. The last time I saw them was 2006, I want to say. And that was an amazing show, too. I mean, it wasn't nearly as close to the schoolgirl Trev at the time, but it was still an amazing show. My favorite album by them is actually Wasting Light. Nothing Against Color and the Shape. That's a kick-ass album. Wasting Light, though, I felt told more of a story. And it's not, I don't think it's one of those concept albums, but it tells a nice story from the beginning to the end. And I mean, it's one of those albums I don't even skip a track. But a good album nonetheless. If I'm talking to anybody new who's never heard of Foo Fighters, never heard anything by them, I'll usually recommend Wasting Light before I recommend Color and the Shape, because of the actual maturity they've made as a band. As for a song, again, I had to pick 2. I couldn't stick to just one. First favorite song by them is Everlong. And it's not because it's my wedding song. I'll point that right off the bat. It's not just because of that. It is actually a kick-ass tune, and one of my favorites to play, on the iPod or on the guitar. Second favorite one is Floaty, off their self-titled album. and it's more, again, just because of the flow. Start off with acoustic, then get into the heavier, and it's distorted to shit, and it's one of my favorites. Anything with a lot of distortion and layers is automatically a great song in my books. Number 5 is Rammstein, and I got into them late. That's a common theme with a lot of my favorite bands. I get into them later. I just really started getting into Slipknot the last couple of years. But I'm not talking about Slipknot, I'm talking about Rammstein. I got into them in 2001 when Mutter came out. And it wasn't because of Lynx 234, it was more because of Feuerfrei, which in translation is Fire at Will. And that was off the Triple X soundtrack, and it's like, okay, yeah, no, I can dig that. So I went out and bought the album, and I was not disappointed at all. Despite the fact that it's all in German, I have nothing against that at all. I don't even bother putting on translator or looking up the lyrics in English because I just don't care. They don't need to speak in English to make it sound good. It just sounds good in any language, but preferably in German. I haven't had the opportunity to see them live yet, but who knows? It could happen this late in their careers. You never know. But what turned me on to them it wasn't so much they were singing in German, but because it was more of a heavier sound than what was out there at the time. By the time I'd already started giving up on the radio, so anything to pass that was good in my books. Favorite album, Lieber ist für alle da. Their last one, which was, I think it was 2009 when it came out. If I'm going to pick one song by them as a favorite, Benzene, started off Rosenrot. After seeing it on the live discs, on Blu-ray and whatever else, it just made me love it even more. Because you listen to it and you're picturing everything going on with it. The fire, the pyros, all that stuff. It's a good tune. I love it. Number 4 is Avenged Sevenfold. And it's funny with them, I'd heard about them before I got into them, and didn't really think I was going to get into them because everybody I was talking to about music at the time, they all had the same feeling, they're just a screamo band and yada yada yada. And it's like, well, when I heard them the first time, and it could have been because I wasn't listening to Sounding the Seventh Trumpet or Waking the Fallen. I was listening to their self-titled album. I was listening to Nightmare. Nightmare was more or less the album that got me into them, and at that point I didn't know Jimmy was already dead. And this is total go against the grain of my belief of when one of the main members dies. Jimmy was one of the main members. He was a contributing songwriter to the band. And I don't really know if they've recovered from it since. The Stage was an amazing album, don't get me wrong. But if you look at something like Hail to the King, Jimmy's presence is sorely missed. But again, I got into them in 2011 through an ex-girlfriend of mine who was a big fan, a huge fan, and in the grieving process at the time because, well, Jimmy died. What I thought about them going in was totally proven wrong. I was into them, and I was glad for it. A lot of people I talk to say, they're Metallica light and yada yada, and it's like, well, that's good as long as they're not Metallica, because Metallica sucks. I said it. Metallica sucks. Deal with it. But I've seen them live 3 times, and again, have not been disappointed at all. I would love to see them more. I've missed them once since I've been into them. That was just when they came around here in 2017. So last year when they came and did a show at Rogers Place, and I missed that. But I did see them open for Metallica, and as soon as they were finished, I left because I was not sticking around to see Metallica, and it's not the first time I've jumped out of a Metallica show. Favorite album? Obviously the self-titled. Not Nightmare. Like I said, Nightmare was the album that introduced me to them. Self-titled is my favorite. And it was really hard to pick one song, because they have so many good songs. I could sit here and go through the catalog and say, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good. But if I'm going to pick one song, it's the song that ends Nightmare, Save Me. Granted, it's 11 minutes, but it's a good 11 minutes. You won't waste your time on that. Number 3, and this one is actually surprising to me that they're in the top 3, is Cancer Bats. It's not surprising because of who they are. It's surprising because I am not the biggest fan of Canadian bands, or Canadian music for that matter. I can't begin to explain why I'm not a huge fan of Canadian music, but it's almost an amazement that I even got into them in the first place. I think what drew me into them was their combination of metal, punk, sludge, and groove, all blended in. I'm glad I got into them, though. I really am. 'Cause, I mean, I don't know what life would be like without Cancer Bats. Listen, in my ears. It might be, you might have someone like Parkway Drive up there, but we're not talking Parkway Drive, we're talking Cancer Bats. I got into them in 2008, right after Hail Destroyer came out. And what a album to get introduced to them by. Hail Destroyer was amazing. Oh, but it's not my favorite album. Seen them live 3 times. I think it's 3 times. Twice. And if you've seen the Trev's Trade Page video where I'm going over my autograph collection, you'll see that I have a few different autograph artifacts. 2 from Liam himself, 1 from the band. I'm not going to get into them again, because then I'll just feel like I'm bragging. You know what I mean? I hate to brag, but some things I do like to brag about. Favorite album is Dead Set on Living. It starts and ends really, really, really nicely. For me, though, I have the special edition on CD for Dead Set on Living. So, not that that's a bad thing, it just means that I have a little bit more to choose from when it comes to that album as opposed to when it ends, basically. Favorite song? I was able to narrow this one down to 1. Sorceress, off the Hail Destroyer album. That is just fast and punk and kicks my ass every fucking time. Number 2 was a band that was number 1 for a long time. That's Nirvana. I got into them in 93. Again, getting into them late. And this late was a bad late. I got into them with In Utero. And at the time I was still listening to the radio. And the first thing I'd already heard, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and most of the stuff from Nevermind. I didn't mind Nevermind. It's not a bad album. It's not raw enough. It's too polished. It's almost borderline pop. And after listening to it, it's like, I don't know if I could get into these guys. But once In Utero came out, and just the raw aggression and the rasp in the voice and everything that went along with it, it's like, yeah, I can get into these guys. And In Utero is an album that is still in circulation to this day. On my playlists, on my iPod, I'll sit down and listen to it start to finish and feel like I listened to it for the first time all over again. It's that good an album in my mind. I mean, I've had a lot of arguments with a lot of Nirvana fans who swear up and down Nevermind was their best album, and I will not hesitate to put in my 2 cents and say, well, here's why I think your opinion is wrong. Listen to my opinion. I don't know if I've ever changed any Nirvana fan's mind, and I'm not trying to. I'm just saying, hey, I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't agree with you. I've broken a lot of hearts saying that, but again, I digress. So, if I'd have known then what I know now, would I have gotten into Nirvana a lot sooner? I doubt it. I think the timing of it, the way it all unfolded, it went the way it was supposed to go. And there's just no way, two ways around that. So again, favorite album is In Utero. And I can't pick one song, I have to pick two. And one of them does come from Nevermind. The first one is Tourette's. Comes from In Utero. That is as punk gets. It's 90 seconds of just screaming in your face, distortion, drums all over the fucking place. Punk. Second one is Stay Away. That one just... It's not on the same level as Tourette's, but it's one of my favorites. For number one, and this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody who knows me, my favorite band of all time right now, and for the last 12 years, is Lamb of God. And they came along at a time when I'd already heard what I thought I knew of heavier shit. This blew my mind right out of the water. I was introduced to them in 2006. The first album I heard by them was Ashes of the Wake. It wasn't the first album I bought from them. But as soon as Laid to Rest opened and the drums and Randy's voice and the layered guitars, that was an orgasm in my ears. And it still is to this day. I mean, there's just not enough good things I can say about Lamb of God. Like, I don't know. They were everything I was looking for and then some. And as a band, I mean, I can think of one album that I would not put in my top 3 of theirs, and that being Wrath. I mean, it was a good album, don't get me wrong, but it was a little more on the softer side for me as far as Lamb of God was concerned. But I've seen them live 4 times. The first one I barely survived. The second time I saw them, they were opening for Metallica, and as soon as they were done, I was gone. And that was the first time I ever walked out of a Metallica show. Was it worth it? Absolutely. I mean, it sucked that I was putting money in Metallica's pocket, but, I got to see Lamb of God. That's all that mattered. I was happy with that. But yeah, seen them live 4 times, have not been disappointed any time I've seen them. Had the opportunity to see them the 5th time, back in 2016, but I wanted to at least come home in one piece before the birth of my daughter. And granted, it was a couple months before, but only a couple months. Favorite album by them? It's so hard to pick one. I mean, the first album I bought by them was Sacrament. Ashes makes a good argument, As the Palaces Burn. I thought for the longest time was my favorite album. It wasn't until the remastered edition of it came out that's like, well, maybe not. I mean, maybe Mark Morton was right when I still had Twitter and I tweeted him saying, the new album, when Desolation came out, they were on, Mark was on Twitter talking about it, and I tweeted him saying, I dig it, I like it, but I prefer the sound of Palaces more. And he said, well, please. He retweeted me back saying, Palaces sounds like a transistor radio. And after listening to that version and the remastered version, I could see where he's saying that. Favorite album? It's a toss-up between Ashes and Sacrament. I don't know if that's just because Machine was producing them or just because of the sound, but Ashes makes its argument, hands down. Favorite song? I couldn't even pick one. There's so many good songs by them that it's really hard to choose. But if I'm going to choose one, I'm going to choose 2. Ashes of the Wake instrumental, followed immediately, as it is in the track listing, by Remorses for the Dead. But if you've never heard Lamb of God before, start with Laid to Rest, or the title track for As the Palaces Burn, or Ruin, and then explore from there. And there's Trev's top 10 favorite bands of all time at this point in time. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Your viewership always means so much to me. I'm glad you do. I'm glad you watch. let's get the sub count up. I mean, like I said, my goal is still 50. I'm still at 9. We'll build it up one at a time if we have to. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe on your way out. Tell a friend. You can find Trev TV on Facebook. You can find Trev TV on Instagram at rockstartrev. In the meantime and in between time, keep on the lookout for new videos from the Trev. Later.